Some characters go through more pain and loss than others, and it's these struggles that really shape who they are. From heartbreaking pasts to crushing defeats, these 10 characters have faced some of the toughest challenges. Their suffering isn't just part of their story, it's what makes them so strong and relatable. It's in their darkest moments that they find the strength to keep going, proving that even after everything, they can still rise again. Onunchu Drax. Drax the Destroyer's suffering in the MCU is arguably the most profound due to the intense personal losses he endured, which shaped his entire existence. His journey of grief began when Ronan the Accuser attacked his home planet, killing his wife and daughter in an act of unimaginable violence. Drax, driven by a desire for vengeance, lost not only his family but his sense of self, becoming a shell of his former self. His life became an endless pursuit of retribution against Ronan, with each step only deepening his pain as he was forced to relive his tragedy time and again. The emotional weight of his loss is compounded by the fact that his transformation into a warrior was not a choice, but a necessity for survival in a universe that offered him no peace or comfort. What makes Drax's pain even worse is how it keeps him isolated. While the other Guardians bond and share laughs, Drax is stuck in his grief, unable to connect with their lighter moments. His obsession with revenge constantly pulls him back into the past, making it hard for him to move forward or enjoy the relationships he could have. His life isn't just about losing his family, it's about being trapped in that loss, constantly battling the anger and sadness that stop him from finding peace or happiness. 9. Hank Pym. Hank Pym's life has been a series of painful losses that really shaped who he is. First and foremost, he lost his wife, Janet Van Dyne, when she was trapped in the quantum realm during a mission back in the 80s. That was a huge blow for Hank, not just because she was his wife, but also his scientific partner. He was left with this deep regret and guilt, always wondering if there was something more he could have done to save her. This loss wasn't just a personal one, it affected his relationship with his daughter, Hope. Hank pushed her away for a long time because of his unresolved grief, and he couldn't bring himself to share the full truth of what happened to Janet, which made things even more complicated between them. But the pain didn't stop there. Hank also lost his company, Pym Technologies, which he had built from the ground up. He was forced out because his methods were considered too risky and unorthodox, and eventually the company was taken over by his former protege, Darren Cross. Watching someone else take control of his life's work was a huge blow to his pride and sense of identity. So Hank ended up feeling like he lost everything: his wife, his career, and the connection he once had with his daughter. It wasn't until later, after some reconciliation with Hope, that he started to heal and reconnect with a sense of purpose. His journey shows how hard it is to move on from such deep losses, especially when they affect every part of your life. But Hank's story is also one of redemption and rebuilding. 8. Rocket Raccoon. Rocket Raccoon's life is a tragic mix of experimentation, betrayal, and constant struggle for self-worth. He wasn't born a regular raccoon. He was genetically modified and experimented on by cruel scientists, which turned him into a living weapon. These experiments weren't just physical, they were psychological, leaving Rocket with deep scars and a burning resentment toward anyone who tries to control him. His physical enhancements, like his intelligence and abilities, were forced upon him, and he was never given the chance to live a normal life. As a result, Rocket is an outcast, constantly battling the pain of being treated like an object or a freak, even though he's far more than that. That feeling of being different and unwanted followed Rocket throughout his life. He's always had trouble trusting people because, in his experience, most others have either used or discarded him. He's fiercely independent, pushing people away because he fears being abandoned again. This defensiveness often comes across as anger or arrogance, but deep down it's just Rocket trying to protect himself from more heartbreak. Despite all of this, he's one of the Guardians of the Galaxy, and over time he's found a sense of belonging with them, though his past continues to haunt him. Rocket's story is a tough one. It's not just about the physical scars, but about how his experiences have shaped him into someone who can never truly feel at home in the universe, even if he's surrounded by people who care about him. 7. Bucky Barnes. Bucky Barnes' life is a pretty heartbreaking story of being stripped of everything he knew and turned into something he never wanted to be. He started as a soldier and best friend to Steve Rogers, but that all changed when Hydra captured him during World War II. They turned him into the Winter Soldier, erasing his memories and using him as a mindless assassin for years. He was just a weapon, forced to do terrible things without any control over it, and he had no idea who he was anymore. When he finally broke free and got his memories back, he had to face the awful reality of what he'd done, which made him feel like an outcast, not just from society, but from himself. Now, Bucky spends most of his time as a wanted man, constantly running from both the law and his past. Even though he wants to make things right, the guilt he carries around from all the damage the Winter Soldier caused keeps him stuck. People are still wary of him, and even though he's trying to redeem himself, it's tough to shake that reputation. His story is all about him trying to find peace with what happened and figure out who he really is again after all the years of being controlled. It's a constant struggle between who he was forced to be and who he's trying to become, and it's not an easy road for him. 6. Steve Rogers. Steve Rogers' life has been filled with some brutal losses. First, there's Peggy Carter, the woman he loved. He was frozen in ice for decades, only to wake up in a world without her. That loss stayed with him for a long time. Then there's Bucky Barnes, his best friend, who he thought he lost in World War II. But when Bucky came back as the brainwashed Winter Soldier, it was a whole new level of pain for Steve. Not only did he have to fight his best friend, but the hope of ever getting him back seemed like a distant dream. It was heartbreaking for Steve to have to live with the idea that the one person he trusted most was now an enemy. The cherry on top was having to face off against Tony Stark during the Civil War. They were once close friends, but when they disagreed about the Sokovia Accords, it split them apart. Steve's loyalty to Bucky and his belief in personal freedom went up against Tony's need for control and accountability. Having to fight Tony was tough, and even worse, knowing that it would ruin their friendship. It's like Steve just couldn't catch a break, losing the people he cared about most. And yet he kept going, even when it felt like too much. Every step forward felt like carrying all that loss with him, but he never really had the chance to stop and grieve. 5. T'Challa. Starting with the loss of his father, King T'Chaka. When T'Chaka dies in Captain America's Civil War, it forces T'Challa to step up and take on the mantle of Black Panther way sooner than he expected. The sudden death of his father wasn't just a personal loss. It threw T'Challa into the position of king before he was truly ready. He had to learn not only how to be a leader, but also how to honor his father's legacy, all while struggling with his own feelings of grief and responsibility. That kind of pressure weighed heavily on him, especially with the burden of leading a whole nation. On top of that, T'Challa faced the loss of his throne when his cousin, Eric Killmonger, returned to challenge him. Killmonger's painful history with Wakanda and his belief that the throne should be his forced T'Challa into a life-or-death battle for his kingdom. T'Challa lost the throne temporarily, and it was a huge blow to his confidence and sense of identity. He had to fight to reclaim his position, not just to prove himself as king, but to protect his people from the chaos Killmonger wanted to bring. His story is about reclaiming not only his throne, but also his sense of self, while dealing with the emotional weight of losing his father, his crown, and the life he thought he was going to lead. 4. Nebula. Nebula's life has been one of unimaginable pain and betrayal, shaped by the nonstop torture and abuse she endured at the hands of her adoptive father, Thanos. Growing up, she and Gamora were raised together as sisters, but their bond was anything but loving. Thanos would pit them against each other in brutal battles, constantly replacing parts of Nebula's body with cybernetic enhancements every time she lost. The endless torment was meant to break her, to turn her into a weapon, and it left deep scars, physically and emotionally. The constant comparison to Gamora, whom Thanos favored, only made things worse, fueling a bitter resentment and a toxic rivalry between the two. This feud between Nebula and Gamora lasted for years, with Nebula seeing Gamora as the perfect daughter and resenting her for not understanding the pain she went through. Even though they were sisters, Nebula's feelings of betrayal and jealousy were strong, and their relationship was marked by anger and distrust. It wasn't until later that Nebula began to see the cracks in her own worldview, realizing that she and Gamora were both victims of Thanos' manipulation. Despite their differences, Nebula had to come to terms with the fact that Gamora was the only family she had left, and their relationship slowly began to shift. But for Nebula, the scars of her past and the years of torment were never easy to shake off, and it's something that haunted her for a long time. 3. Star-Lord. Star-Lord's life is pretty much defined by loss. He lost his mom, Meredith, when he was just a kid, and that was already a huge blow. Things got even worse when he was abducted by the Ravagers shortly after her death. He grew up with them, never really fitting in, always carrying around that sense of abandonment. It's no surprise that his tough exterior hides a lot of emotional scars from those early years. Then, in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, Star-Lord thought he had finally found a family in his dad, Ego, but it turned out to be a nightmare. Ego wasn't the father figure he imagined. He was a total monster, and Peter found out the hard way. He learned that Ego had manipulated him and used him for his own twisted plans, and he had to fight him to survive. On top of that, Peter discovered he was literally part of this godlike, dangerous being. It was a huge emotional hit, losing the dad he'd wanted and having to fight him for his life. Star-Lord's whole journey is about dealing with all that loss, trying to find connections, and not letting the universe completely crush him. 2. Tony Stark. Tony Stark's life is full of gut-wrenching losses that shaped him into the complex character he became. First, he lost his parents, Howard and Maria Stark, in a car accident, a tragedy that left him with unresolved grief and a complicated relationship with their legacy. Growing up without them made Tony feel like he had to prove himself, and that drive pushed him to build his empire and his ego. But his world was turned upside down again when he was captured by terrorists in Afghanistan, an experience that forced him to confront his own mortality. During that time, he was forced to build weapons for his captors, but instead, he created the first Iron Man suit, leading to his escape. The trauma from that experience left him with deep psychological scars, and he returned home a changed man. Then came the crushing blow during the events of Avengers: Infinity War, when Tony Stark lost Peter Parker, the kid he'd taken under his wing. Tony had always felt like a mentor to Spider-Man, and watching Peter die in his arms after the snap hit him harder than anything else. Peter had been a beacon of hope for Tony, someone he could look after and protect, and losing him left Tony shattered. It wasn't just the loss of a friend, but the loss of his own sense of responsibility, his desire to keep people safe, and the guilt that came with not being able to stop Thanos. Tony's journey was always about dealing with these deep emotional scars, from the death of his parents to the trauma of being captured and then the devastating loss of Peter, showing how even the most brilliant and self-assured people have their breaking points. Thor's life has been a constant cycle of loss, each one taking a huge toll on him. First, he lost his father, Odin, who not only raised him, but was also a guiding force in his life. Odin's death in Thor. Ragnarok left Thor feeling unmoored, and he suddenly had to step up as the ruler of Asgard, a responsibility he wasn't fully prepared for. But the pain didn't stop there. He also had to deal with the loss of Loki, his brother, who had been both an ally and enemy throughout their lives. Despite their complicated relationship, losing Loki was heartbreaking for Thor, especially since Loki had always been the source of so much chaos in his life. Thor finally accepted him as family, and Loki's death in Avengers. Infinity War added another layer of grief to Thor's already heavy heart. And as if that wasn't enough, Thor lost all of Asgard itself when Hela destroyed it in Thor. Ragnarok, the fall of his home, the place that defined his identity as a prince, was a blow that left Thor feeling like he had nothing left. He not only had to watch the destruction of his kingdom, but he also had to lead his people to safety with little more than hope and determination. Losing his father, brother, and home, all in such a short time, left Thor broken, struggling to find his place in the universe. His journey is about learning to cope with these massive losses, realizing that while he might have lost everything, he still has the strength to keep fighting and rebuilding. If you like this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. We've got a lot more cool stuff coming your way. And hey, make sure to turn on notifications so you don't miss any updates. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.